Okay, hello. I am going to model how to write your in-class essay. So I'm starting off with a couple of different things here. First, I want to know what I'm graded on. So I want to have our rubric, and I really want to go over this before so that I know what I need to do exactly to get the grade that I'm expecting, that I know that I can get. So I'm going to look on here, and I see that the major component on this rubric is analysis of characters in the text. So I have pretty high expectations for myself. I'm going to be looking in the highly effective range, which will gain you any points out of the 40 from 36 to 40. So what I have to do for this is I have to thoroughly analyze how one's cultural experience affects a character's decisions, clearly and precisely compare or contrast experiences amongst characters, and determine how a character's experience advances the plot or themes. So you'll notice that you don't necessarily have to do the theme, but especially when you're working with these ideas like gender roles, crime, imperialism, it lends itself so well to creating a theme statement that it would be so much easier to just roll with that and show me what you know, because it's easy to really say how an action affects the plot, but it's a lot harder to analyze a theme. So if I'm wanting to get a highly effective, that's what I'm going for. I'm going for a theme, unless you can really analyze that plot well. Okay, so I'll look over here, and I'll notice that my second and third elements that I need, that I'm graded on, are an introduction and body. So we know pretty much how to do this. You've been learning this for years. I know that an introduction that is effective needs a hook. I know that it needs sufficient background information to kind of lead me into this. And I know that I need a very clear and precise thesis that really attacks the topic that I am going to write about for the future. For the body, looking in here, logically organizes supporting evidence, uses topic sentences to indicate the focus of each paragraph. This especially is where I want to focus in, because I want to go back to that thesis, make sure I'm referring back to that thesis throughout my entire paper, and smoothly connects ideas within paragraphs and links major sections with thoughtful transitions. This should not just be firstly, secondly, thirdly. So we'll talk about how to do that a little bit later once we actually start writing. Okay. And then if we go to the second page of the rubric, we see that we have quote integration. So you're not just putting a sentence from the passage into your essay. You are actually incorporating that quote into your sentence. You have created the sentence, and you are simply filling in with whatever quote is reasonable for your sentence, so that it makes sense, so that it's still your content. It's not just 7 lines of a quote from the passage. And then we have a conclusion. To get a 5 on the conclusion, you really do need 2 things. You need that classic summary and conclusion. This is what I talked about. But you also need that push forward. You want a call to action. You want, why is this important? What should your audience take away from this essay? And then lastly, we have grammar and conventions. So I know exactly what I'm being graded on now, which is always good to review. And now I'm going to go over my 2 prompts. So prompt 1 says, after reading your chosen literary text, compare your focus character's experience to the experience of another character in the same excerpt. In your essay, you should critically identify and evaluate the problem that one or both characters face, capture both characters' motivations, and reference specific events from the selection. The contrast between the two characters' experiences should be evident. Okay, so this one deals with two characters within a text. It's pretty easy to take a text, like say you're working with My Name Was Kyoko, When My Name Was Kyoko, and you're talking about imperialism. Well, both of the siblings are Korean and both are experiencing imperialism. That might not create a very sophisticated analysis. It would probably work to compare them and show those similarities, but it's going to be so much more compelling if you show this very subtle difference. Okay, so if you can maybe pick out a character that experiences that in a different way, or if you can make that comparison, interesting, then it's fine. Just be cautious of what you are doing and how you are writing. Now, the second prompt says, using the protagonist from your chosen literary text, compare their experience to Marjane's. In your essay, you should critically identify and evaluate the problem that both characters face, capture both characters' motivations, and reference specific events from the selection. The parallels between the character and Marjane Satrapi's experience should be evident. So I see that between the two prompts, I'm most likely going to choose a contrast in how culture influences a certain character for prompt 1, but I'm most likely going to choose a comparison for how culture influences people for prompt 2. So, when I went through Their Eyes Were Watching God with you in class, when I was annotating, I initially thought that I was going to write about the theme race, but this passage actually lends really well to me writing about gender roles because I see a very clear contrast in this passage about gender, and very specifically talking about how Janie and Jody interact and attack each other's gender, and how they interact with it in general. So, because I really see that as a contrast that I think I could write about, I am going to do prompt 1. So, I am comparing the two characters, Janie and Jody, from Their Eyes Were Watching God, and I'm going to contrast how gender shapes and influences their experience in the novel. Okay, so let's get started on actually writing this out. Okay, so I'm going to start by writing my name up at the top. You don't have to use this heading specifically, but it's just what I happen to come up with. So I'm going to write title, and basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by outlining my essay. You all will have an outline hopefully already completed when you're getting to this step, so it will be really easy just to fill in. If this was an essay that I had more time to work on, I might be more creative with the structure. However, I do know that I'm being graded on a very specific type of structure, so I'm going to play it safe just for this time and use what I'm familiar with and what I know I can do well. So I have the intro, and the first thing I know I need is a hook. The second thing I need is some background information to lead my reader in, and the last thing I know I need is my thesis. I'm going to do just one body paragraph for you all. So I know that I'll need some type of transition into that body paragraph that is going to be more than first off, comma. And then with that transition, I also want to write, I want to have a tie in to my thesis, because when you have body paragraphs, they should always start out in a traditional essay. They should always start out with a direct tie into that thesis so that you have focus. From there, I might have like one sentence of support for my essay for how I am saying that this ties in. I will provide my evidence with a page number, and then I will explain how this shows my thesis. And I'll get a little bit into that as we go on later. From there, I want to end my sentence with a restatement or a tie back to my thesis, because again, that is really our rock throughout this whole essay. That's what we want to keep coming back to. Since I'm only doing one body paragraph, I'm going to go ahead and jump to the conclusion. In the conclusion, we summarize, and that can really be our downfall sometimes, just because it's easy to just repeat everything we said and be done with it. But what we really need to have an effective conclusion is that I know I want to have a call to action or overall significance of my paper. Why is this even important? Why should I give crap? Okay, so let's go ahead and start. I'm going to actually start with my thesis because I want to know what I'm writing about. So when I was looking at this passage, one thing that I really kept coming back to throughout was the power in gender roles and how gender kind of established power in the relationship between Jody and Janie. So, what I am going to discuss, I think, is going to be about how gender can make people either voiceless or how it can empower people. Okay, so let's start out. So my thesis might be something like, in the novel, their eyes were watching God by Zora Neale Hurston. I am going to italicize this because we know that the name of the novel is italicized. You know what? And I will be introducing my title and author earlier, so I'm actually going to cut that down a little bit and just start with Hurston. So in the novel, their eyes were watching God. Hurston asserts, I want to really use a strong verb there, so I'm going to use asserts that, what does she assert? That gendered power in relationships can make one voiceless. Okay, so this is where I'm starting, but I don't necessarily know if that's complete enough, especially referencing back to this rubric. What am I actually arguing? Okay, and a lot of what I'm arguing, 50 whole points of this rubric is the analysis of the characters. So I have a good theme in there, gendered power in relationships can make one voiceless. And you know what? I am going to amend this already. And instead of can make one voiceless, I'm going to make this a stronger statement by saying makes one voiceless. Okay, I like that a lot better. It's more active instead of just saying, well, this might happen, but it also might not. Okay, so going back to this rubric, it says clearly and precisely compares or contrasts characters amongst the text. So I also want to add into this thesis how my characters actually interact. Okay, so in the novel, their eyes were watching God. Hurston uses the implications of Janie's and Jody's differing sex to assert that gendered power in relationships makes one voiceless. Okay. In the novel, their eyes were watching God. Hurston uses the implications of Janie's and Jody's differing sex to assert that gendered power in relationships makes one voiceless. Okay, so I like this better. I may go back to amend it even more later, but for right now, I'm going to stick to this. So I have a thesis, which is really the most important part of my intro. Yes, the hook is important. Yes, the background information is important, but I am also really concerned with the body of this paragraph because I want to have a good argument. I need something to back that up. So I'm going to go ahead and go into this part right here. Okay. So, both characters in this passage really use each other and they use their gender to really demean each other and gain power over the other characters. So I'm going to start out with my support and just talk about the beginning of this. It's going to be a little bit more figurative, which will allow me to do more a more out there analysis. And so I'm going to start off a little bit stronger. So let's look here. I am going to start by talking about that figurative language itself. So I'm going to say that when Hurston uses metaphors found in nature, she emphasizes the differences in power that are present and tied to the gender of Janie versus Jody. Okay, so let me move on to my evidence. I'm going to start off, and this is going to be my own sentence. It's not going to be just one line from the actual text. So I'm going to say, she describes Janie as, she describes Janie as the surface. I'm cutting out a couple words to make this make more sense. Beaten down by the wheels and and as having emotional disturbances, oops, like shade patterns in the woods. And then I'm going to quote that. That is on page 76 of Their Eyes Were Watching God. So now I need to explain this. What I want to do when I'm explaining is I really want to pick out those specific words that I feel have that extra meaning. So I'm going to talk about one word at a time, really, in these explanations. So let's start off with Hurston's use of comparing, okay, so that's kind of wordy. I'm going to erase this. Hurston's comparison of Janie to immobile objects such as the surface. See how I'm quoting this again here? Surface. That comes directly from here. Immobile objects such as the surface of the earth, while she makes her male counterpart, Jody, the mobile wheels that roll over that earth, suggests that Jody has some freedom as a male that Janie does not possess. So what I'm thinking right now is that I am connecting it to gender, but not very explicitly. So you could say, yeah, maybe Janie is the surface of the earth and Jody is the wheels, but there's nothing that inherently makes that male or female. So now I feel like I need to make that more explicit. So that is what I'm going to focus on next in my explanation. Okay. So by labeling Janie, or not by labeling, I'm going to change that word, that's not exactly what I want to say. By characterizing Janie as a more passive or feminine object, while Jody is described in a more active or traditionally considered masculine way. Hurston is emphasizing a deficit in the gendered relationship. Okay, I know I don't like that, so I'm going to have to reword that. Hurston is emphasizing a deficit, in a deficit in Janie's power as, I'm just going to erase that because that does not work. as the two interact in traditionally gendered ways. Okay. This is kind of awkward up here, reading it again, or traditionally considered masculine way. I also have traditionally gendered ways here too, so that is a little awkward having that repeated twice. I'm going to take that away, and let me read this to make sure it makes sense. By characterizing Janie as a more passive or feminine object, while Jody is described in a more active or masculine way, Hurston is emphasizing a deficit in Janie's power as the two interact in traditionally gendered ways. Okay, I like that a lot better. That's good. But I still have only described one of these quotes, so I feel like I should also go back and finish this last quote. Okay, so I'm going to have a little transition in there. Additionally, she describes Janie as shade patterns, while Jody is the sun. And then looking back up here, I didn't actually put the part about the sun in there, so I need to go back and make sure that I am referencing something in full before I start explaining it. So let me just fill in the rest of that quote from the book. So I've decided that I want to add a little bit more here. Additionally, she describes Janie as shade patterns, while Jody is the sun, indicating that Janie's entire existence is only an extension of Jody himself. So I need a little bit more explanation there. Because shade or a shadow is a lack of sun, Hurston suggests that there is, again, a lack of power or substance to Janie that is directly opposed by Jody's power and authority. Okay, I don't like this word directly opposed by Jody's power. That is antithetical to Jody's power. I'm going to make this one sentence and just connect it with a semicolon. This, I'm not going to say again because I just did in the line previous. This further, you know what, I'm going to add that in here. Furthermore, this reflects traditional gender roles. This reflects Jody and Janie's fulfillment of traditional gender roles as Jody takes on the active masculine role while Janie is stuck in or reduced to the passive feminine role. Okay. So tie this back into the thesis because I feel like at this point that's a pretty thorough explanation. So, restatement or tie back to thesis. Hurston, because we are talking about the characters, Hurston provides a stark contrast that highlights both the gender differences in Janie and Jodie's relationship, as well as the power deficit Janie experiences. Okay, so I like that restatement tie back. I think that that does really go well with the thesis I have in the intro, but it's also very short. It's not overly wordy, and it doesn't really add anything new at this point. Okay, so let's go back up here while we're on the thesis and just go ahead. I'm going to do that transition into that body paragraph. So I want a little bit of a transition from the beginning, but it doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to be very out there just because we're pretty much going into the same thing from thesis to thesis. So I'm going to start off with Hurston's first portrayal of the Hurston's first portrayal of the power and gender that that Hurston's first portrayal of the power and gender roles that prevents the assertion of Janie. Okay, so this is weird. This sentence is not happening for me initially, so I'm just going to have to think about how to reword this. Okay, Hurston's first portrayal of the power and gender roles. Okay, that's a little simplistic. And I also feel like it's not exactly tying in, like I should be talking about the relationship between Janie and Jodie. So I'm going to go ahead and erase this. Hurston's first portrayal of the power and gender roles, of the power or lack thereof in gender roles is supported in images of nature that reflects the lack of power Janie possesses. Hurston's first portrayal of the power or lack thereof and gender roles is supported in images of nature that reflects the lack of power Janie possesses. So I like that I have discussed the focus of my body paragraph, which is the images of nature, but I don't like that last part because I feel like it's pretty redundant. So I'm going to take this away. I also need to correct this agreement because it's the images that reflect. Hurston's first portrayal of the power or lack thereof in gender roles is supported in images of nature that reflect the inability or the lack of freedom Janie has in her relationship with Jody. And I like that so much better because I'm again talking about that relationship, which was specifically in the rubric, and talking about the difference in how Janie and Jody actually experience gender. Okay, so because I have all of these elements, I'm going to go ahead and erase the little markers that I made to outline for myself. And tap over. Okay, and there is my first body paragraph. You could probably do this in only 2 body paragraphs. You don't necessarily have to have 3, and you might even be able to do it in 1 body paragraph if you have a really killer like explanation, but you would just need to make sure that you hit all of those rubric points, that you have those transitions in your body, and that everything has like a very logical flow. Okay, so let's go back to the intro and kind of focus on this now that we have the meat of the essay done. So, for a hook, generally what I like to do is that I like to just have a powerful statement that relates to my thesis to start out. So let me start off. Let's say, so we're talking about the implications of differing sexes and voicelessness. So I'm going to start off, I'm going to be a little grandiose, a little bit exaggerating. So I'm going to say half of the world's population experiences life in a suppressed so it's a synonym for suppressed. In a suppressed, I'll maybe add a synonym in when I think of one. In a rest, way, simply because of how they were born. Okay, so, I mean, it's not the most life-changing thing, but it still is a strong statement to make, so I like it. I'll go with it. Now, the background info you can usually spin in a couple different ways. You could either do it based on the book, Their Eyes Were Watching God, or you could do it based on the background of maybe gender itself. Just for simplicity's sake, and because I don't have the internet in this situation to help me with statistics or information that I might not be very knowledgeable on, I'm just going to go off of the book. Okay. So I'm going to start off introducing my title and author. So Zora Neale Hurston writes the novel Their Eyes Were Watching God, a chilling yet optimistic look at African American women in the early 1900s. Hurston follows the life of Janie, a strong-willed and persevering young woman who faces many challenges in love and relationships throughout her life. Okay, so I'm going to italicize my book title. And then I think I'm okay with that background info. It's pretty short. It's not too overreaching, but it still does the trick. So in this, I am going to erase this extra stuff. Okay. Let me take a look at this thesis again. In the novel, Their Eyes Were Watching God, Hurston uses the implications of Janie and Jodie's differing sex to assert that gendered power in relationships makes one voiceless. Okay, I'm okay with that. I feel like that goes really well with my paragraph down here, which I wasn't exactly sure how well it would fit at the beginning, even though I kind of had an idea of how they were connected, but I do actually like that, so I'm going to keep that. Okay, now we just have to do the conclusion. So we are going to summarize, so I'm going to start off with that tie back into thesis. So I'm going to start with something like ultimately. In conclusion is a little bit overused, so I'm going to try to do something just a little bit different to transition us into this. Ultimately, Hurston's portrayal of Janie and Jodie's relationship details the lack of power and personality that can accompany imbalanced roles based on sex. Okay. Ultimately, Hurston's portrayal of Janie and Jodie's relationship details the lack of power and personality that can not accompany, that's not the right word, so I'm going to change this. That can stem from imbalanced roles based on sex. Okay, I like that better. Okay. So now I'm going to go, if I had more body paragraphs than one, I would include these in here as well, but I'm just going to focus on this one. She focuses on figurative language to create vivid images of mobility that reflect this difference in the way Janie as a woman and Jodie as a man experience their gendered roles in the relationship. Okay, so I think that's a pretty good summary, and this is really the important part. So let's figure out a call to action or just a why is this important for our reader. So we are talking about pushing this out to everyone else. What can you learn? So I'm going to maybe push this out to the women and say, women, though historically stifled and oppressed, can, okay, so can is a little bit of a wishy-washy word. I'm not going to use can. I'm going to use must. That is a really good word for a call to action. You must do this. It is essential for you to do this. Okay, so women, though historically stifled and oppressed, must let go. Oh, you know what? Better word. Abrogate these gender roles to empower themselves and rise to their full potential. Okay. So I like that ending sentence. It is pretty strong. It kind of ties everything together and says, why do we care? So I'm going to erase all of this stuff. And then we have an essay. So, and a title. What is a creative title I could use? The title for me is never the most important thing, but it is just something a little extra. So what could I put here? I could say something even as simple, maybe an alliteration that always kind of helps. So, release your problems and realize your potential. And then make that grammatically correct. Oops. Okay, yeah, a little cheesy, but it's fine. It works. And then at the very end, I would make this the correct spacing, which is 2. And then I'm good to go. I would just submit this to Canvas. And actually, this right here is almost 2 pages, which is what your prompt says that you're required to do. You're not required, but it's your guidelines for length. So that would probably work pretty well. I hope this has been helpful for everyone. If you have any questions or anything, please let me know. Please put any questions in your little discussion for your homework where you are answering the 3 things, the 3 strategies that you've learned from watching this video, and have a wonderful day.